Scenes off the chopping board. Don't call me maybe. By Andai. It's not a sex ed talk. I'm just acting as their temporary father figure. Oh no, that's not really much better, is it? When Shota returned to the dining room with the largest mug of coffee he could manage, he nearly did a double take at the group of plenty students sitting diligently in front of the chair where Shota had been sitting and grading papers 5 minutes beforehand. Fighting the urge to return to the kitchen, dump out his plain black coffee, and fill his mug up to the brim with pure espresso or something even stronger, Shota cursed inwardly but resigned himself to his fate. God help him, he needed so much caffeine to get through this. The picture it made, all of his kids sitting almost entirely cross-legged or seiza, and every one of them the epitome of eagerness in their own ways, was almost enough to make Shota laugh. It was an image he'd kill to have every morning when he walked into homeroom, and its occasionally unearthly levels of volume. And of course, he'd finally get it, preparing to do something he'd probably rather face another normal than do. Biting back a sigh, Shota took a long pull of his coffee and sat down in his chair at the kitchen table, turning it to the side so he could face his students. A few of them were on the armchairs and cushions of the couches and love seats nearby, with there only being so much room on the floor for everyone to sit. Every one of them was quiet as Shota took one last deep breath, closed his eyes, and released it in another sigh. All right, he began, opening his eyes with no small amount of effort. Sooner to start, sooner to end, he supposed. Ground rules. Total of 10 questions. As in, I will answer 10 questions total, and not per person. They all nodded. Kaminari seemed to have explained this to them so far, at least while Shota's coffee had been brewing. Good. No laughing at anyone for questions, regardless of how obvious or stupid they might seem to you, and especially no questions aimed at making anyone uncomfortable. That includes me. Shota leveled them all with a pointed look. I understand that living in the dorms means that you might not get to talk with your parents or siblings about personal matters as much as you would have been able to otherwise. It's that, along with the fact that I don't want you wrapped up in teenage dilemmas during dangerous situations during internships and heroic classes, is the reason I'm even entertaining this idea at all. That being said, Shota stressed, there are things that I will not talk about with you. Call your parents or your siblings or ask Recovery Girl, I really don't care. He waved his hand flippantly. Final rule. Once 10 questions are done, I'm done. That's it. If you really have any other questions that can't wait, try Mike. I'm sure he'd love to help you all with whatever teenage angst you might have. A few of the kids gave little smiles or chuckles at that, and Shota surveyed the room pointedly. Are we clear? A chorus of, yes, sensei, chorused back at him, and Shota took another long drink from his coffee mug before sighing. He had a feeling he'd be doing a lot of that tonight. God, why was he doing this again? All right, he grunted, looking out across the students gathered in front of him. First question. Go. Several hands raised at once, and Shota looked over them before nodding at Ojiro. The boy lowered his hand along with the rest of his peers, his tail twitching nervously from where Baraka was petting the hairy tuft at the end of it in her lap. What's a good first date idea? Ojiro asked, voice confident, but expression a little uncertain. Or, I guess, what's not a good first date idea? Anything along those lines, I suppose. A few of the kids in 1A nodded in appreciation of the question, and Baraka continued to stroke the end of Ojiro's tail reassuringly, as Shota visibly thought about the question. In some ways. I suppose the answer to that question depends on the people going on the date. Shota responded after a moment. If you're boisterous people, I imagine an arcade would be fun. If you're quieter, a cat cafe might be a good starting place. In general, I think that a good aspect of any first date is that there is equal opportunity to get to know the other person and to have easy periods where you don't have to talk or fill the silence on your own. Shota reasoned. Ojiro frowned just a little, tilting his head to the side in an obvious inquiry that he didn't vocalize in case he counted as another separate question. Shota hummed for a second before continuing his explanation. I guess one way to think about it is that you want a first date to serve as a platform for subsequent dates, but you still want it to be a good time even if you decide halfway through that you're not romantically compatible. So if it's your type of thing, an arcade date would be good because there's an opportunity to talk and get to know each other. What's your favorite game, and want to do multiplayer, and other chances to talk about life while you play some of the easier games, but also a chance to just focus on what you're doing and what game you're playing if you realize quickly that you don't think you'll be going for on a second date after all. Same kind of thing with a cat cafe. Shota explained. There's plenty of opportunity to talk about your likes and dislikes while you're petting cats. But if you decide you don't like the other person, or people romantically after the first half hour or so, you can just pet the cats and talk about the cats instead of your personal lives. There's also always the dinner and a movie option. Shota mused aloud. That satisfies both the talking and non-talking portions, but if you realize halfway through dinner that you don't want a second date, you still have the rest of dinner to get through with no source of conversation, and if you realize that you want to know more about the other person or people you're on the date with, but still have to sit through a silent movie, it might seem a bit inopportune. Ojiro nodded with a small smile at Shota's answer, and Shota realized with a start that, though his answer had been long, it had been easy. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Aizawa-sensei. Ojiro responded genuinely, many of his classmates nodding their heads in happy agreement. Ida even seemed to be taking notes, to Shota's amusement, but not surprise. Shota simply nodded in response. You're welcome. Question number 2. After scanning the new sea of hands, Shota pointed at one. Cyril. Sarah grinned and asked easily, Okay, so who should pay for the date? Midoriya, Ida, and Todoroki all looked at each other pointedly out of their peripheral vision, and Shota fought back a bark of laughter. It seemed most of one of his couples actually had the same question. Well, that would depend. Shota hedged. On who's in a better financial position to do so? Todoroki asked the question like it was a statement, looking pointedly at Midoriya, and Shota had the sudden mental image of the boy going to the most expensive restaurant in Tokyo and treating both of his boyfriends by flashing Endeavor's platinum credit card at the waiter. Shota bit back a smile at the thought before answering. Not really. He responded, pointedly ignoring the startled and slightly dirty look Todoroki flashed him. Well, it's really an issue that you have to discuss with your partner or partners. For example, Shota explained, if it's the first date especially, who has to amount? If you're the one doing the asking, it's polite to pay for whatever you suggest to do. That being said, and especially in longer-term relationships, it's best to have a conversation about who's paying for what or when. If it's one person's birthday, for example, that person probably shouldn't be made to pay for their own birthday date. If it's an anniversary, you can either switch off paying at different times or go on more than one date, and one person fronts the bill for the date that they chose. Shota shrugged. Communication there is really key. If you feel like you can't afford something, communicate it. If you don't feel comfortable having your entire meal paid for, say something. If you're not financially well off enough to pay for eating out, but you have a few good ideas on how to do stay-in dates for cheap that are still fun, do that. The only thing I can really recommend there is that you don't let anyone else, especially society, tell you who should be paying for what. A while ago, it was usual for the man to pay for all the dates. Shota reminded them. But then again, that was when it was only really normal for a man to date a woman, and for the two to only date each other. Figure things out at your own pace, and if you don't feel comfortable spending money on dates, there's always the option for a movie night in or a picnic with food you already have. Oh, a picnic sounds fun! Hagakare squealed, Suyu nodding and shooting her a fond look. Zero bowed his head in thanks, and Todoroki turned to his boyfriends, whispering not so quietly, I still want to take you to that nice place on my dad's dime, and you're not convincing me otherwise. Ignoring Midoriya's giggles and Ida's fish-like gaping mouth, Shota looked around at the new sea of raised hands. Yaoyorozu, he called after a moment, and the girl lowered her hands back to her lap. How to put this? She murmured to herself. I suppose. What anniversaries should one celebrate, and what would count as a good or normal gift for those? Shota raised a single eyebrow, and Yaoyorozu flushed. Pardon me, I didn't mean to ask 2 questions. That's fine. Shota grumbled. I'll count that as 1. Yaoyorozu let out a sigh of relief as he took another sip from his coffee mug, thinking before he finally responded. That one depends on how old you are, as well as communication with your partner or partners, but it's a little easier. Personally, I don't understand the need to celebrate anniversaries much at all, but that's just me. Shota shrugged, ignoring Yaoyorozu's slightly dismayed expression. For what I could recommend, though,
I'd say there's no harm in mentioning an anniversary as long as you don't expect anything special to happen ahead of time, unless you planned it,
Shota said.
In new relationships, I'd say maybe every month anniversary up to 6 months can be a little special. Get flowers or something, or maybe a slightly nicer than usual dinner.
He frowned in thought.
Then I'd say every year-long anniversary should be something relatively special, like a dressy dinner or fancy date. Even just a quiet night in with a funny movie can be nice too, though.
Shota shrugged.
It really depends on your individual tastes. Just remember that you're all kids. Don't buy or expect to get any fancy jewelry or anything. A nice dinner and maybe a few flowers, and just the recognition that it's kind of a special day should work.
I see, Yogorozu murmured, and Shota realized that coming from a rich family, as well as being able to literally create any precious material whose composition she knew with the use of her quirk, probably skewed her sense of value for material goods. Jiro honestly looked a little relieved, and Shota couldn't help but wonder if Yogorozu had already tried to make her something a little out of a normal teenager's price range. Thank you, Aizawa-sensei.
You're welcome,
Shota murmured over the rim of his coffee mug, taking another deep pull before choosing another hand.
Kaminari,
he called, nodding towards his hand. The boy must have been thinking hard on what question to ask, since this was the first time he'd raised his hand, and he was more or less the reason for this impromptu session in the first place. How do you know if someone likes you back? Kaminari asked with a sort of painful sincerity, and Shota fought back a sigh. Of course he'd ask this question.
That one is significantly harder to answer,
Shota responded wearily, absent-mindedly organizing the papers he'd been grading earlier into a stack on the table. Kaminari's face fell, and Shota hurried to add,
just because everyone is different. Sometimes body language can help, if they're oriented toward you more or something. I think I heard that somewhere.
Shota screwed up his face in thought, searching desperately through his memories of Googling the same question in his youth and reading through WikiHows to see if the way that Hisashi turned his feet towards him while talking meant anything. Teenage desperation.
In general,
Shota started slowly.
The best baseline is seeing how they treat you versus how they treat someone you know, to the best of your ability at least, that they're not interested in romantically. Usually, if they maintain eye contact with you, or ask for little favors, or go out of their way to engage and continue conversation with you, or seek you out in a group, or laugh at your jokes, or brushes up against you casually, or pays significant attention to you, it means they're probably interested in you. Some people are just naturally like that, though.
Shota warned Riley, thinking of his husband.
So, it can be tricky. Intuition helps more than you think it might.
Kaminari pouted a little at the lack of definite easy answer, but nodded gratefully nevertheless. Hands raised again, and this time Shota squinted at what he thought were bangles floating in midair.
Hagakare?
He half called, half asked, and was rewarded with an enthusiastic squeal and a question from the girl after all. Okay, how do you know that you like someone else? Hagakare asked, her voice shyer than Shota was used to hearing it, and he fought back a frown.
That's hard too, he admitted, but a little less, I suppose. That really depends on you personally. I've heard it described a lot of different ways. For some people, it's like looking at the person they like and feeling lighter or warmer or something. For others, it's realizing that you like someone's company more than anyone else's, to the point you always want to be with them.
Shota hummed for a moment in thought, taking another sip of his slowly emptying coffee mug.
Thing is, though, that can only be applied to really close friends. I'd say the point where you realize that you like someone romantically is when you want to...
Shota scrunched up his nose at the words that were about to come out of his mouth.
Get closer to them, physically. Like wanting to hold their hand, or...
Kiss them? Tsuyu asked innocently, and though Shota grimaced a little, he was actually thankful that she'd said it, so he didn't have to.
Yes.
Shota nodded eventually.
That can manifest differently for people based on their sexual or romantic orientations, though. So in a very real sense, it's just trusting your gut and experimenting, and understand that you won't get everything right on the first try.
Okay. Thanks, Sensei. Hagakare chirped, Shota grunted in response.
Alright, you're 5 questions in, and have 5 left. Should so.
Shota called, and the purple-haired boy lowered his hand and asked his question in the same breath, his face seeming expressionless to anyone who didn't know him well enough to detect the faint anxiety beneath the surface.
How do you know if you like anyone at all?
Shinso asked deadpan, though his face gave away his uncertainty. Shota felt himself soften a bit involuntarily. No matter how much he worked to not show favoritism, it's a little different answering questions when it's to your son, he supposed.
That's probably the hardest one to answer, if I'm being honest.
Shota replied with a soft sigh.
I thought I was asexual and aromantic for a very long time, before I realized that I just had to be emotionally close enough with someone to feel either kind of attraction. That's called demi, by the way.
Shota explained for the few members of the class that looked like they'd just realized something profoundly important. God, he knew that feeling!
The best thing you could do for yourself is familiarize yourself with the different types of attraction, and realize that gender and sexuality are fluid. They change with you. Just try and be open and honest with yourself, and realize that not everything will make sense at once.
Shota softened just enough for his students to notice if their looks of surprise were anything to go by.
Being a teenager is hard, even when you're not training to be society's next heroes. Just try and be kind to yourself and realize that you won't always get it right the first time, and that's fine. Communication in any relationship is always key, and that includes in your relationship with yourself. If something feels wrong, don't force it.
Shota shrugged.
Just let yourself be, I guess. Sorry, I can't be any more specific.
Shinso shook his head, the barest hint of a smile on his face.
No, that helped. Thanks.
Shota smiled just a bit himself and nodded, then schooled his face again and looked over his students once more.
Alright, question 7. Uraraka.
What if they like someone else? Who you like, I mean? Uraraka asked hesitantly, her hand still carding through Ojiro's tail fur in a gesture that seemed more geared towards soothing her than him now. Or maybe how do you tell that they like someone else instead of you? Uraraka grimaced. Sorry if that's two questions. The first one, I guess, if I had to pick. Shota thought for a second, pulling his hair back into a lazy bun as he did so.
There's not much you can do there.
He finally answered as he looped the hair tie 3 times before settling his hands back in his lap.
If they like someone else and they're not poly, you just have to support them in their decision. It's a little more complicated if they are poly, because then you have to consider whether or not they're already in a relationship with the other person they like, and if that person is also poly, and if they'd be willing to add another partner, and if they'd be willing to add you as a partner. Poly couples are still much less common than monogamous ones, though.
Shota mused.
So that comes with its own complications. I'm afraid I don't know too much about them. The best course of action is still probably communication. As awkward as it might seem, it's the only way to know for certain, and with any luck, it'll be worth it.
Uraraka nodded determinedly once Shota finished talking, one hand clenched in a fist and the other still running fingers through Ojiro's tail fur. Now that was very helpful, Sensei, thank you!
Shota murmured simply in response. 3 questions left. Todoroki. How do you compliment or flirt with someone without it being creepy?
Todoroki asked blankly, and Shota was suddenly vaulted back to a memory he'd forgotten he'd had of passing Todoroki and Midoriya in a hallway right after their first internships when the hero killer had been apprehended.
Midoriya.
Todoroki called out to the other boy who waited for it to catch up in the hallway. Ah, Todoroki-kun! Midoriya greeted in his typical nervous but excited manner. What can I do for you?
You have very nice hands,
Todoroki had said, deadpan, taking Midoriya aback.
Despite their crushed status, they are very nice.
Thank you? Midoriya squeaked out, flushed and confused.
You're welcome. I just wanted you to know.
Todoroki had finished, stalking past Midoriya with a barely perceptible flush, leaving the other boy standing alone and confused in the middle of the hallway. Ah! Shota thought to himself with no small amount of humor. So he was trying to flirt. Good to know I wasn't the only teenager hopelessly lost their romance during their time at UA.
First of all, make sure that the compliment is intelligible as one.
Shota finally answered wryly, noting with satisfaction that both Ida and Midoriya, the latter in particular, held in surprised chuckles as Todoroki blinked at their teacher's advice.
Another good rule of thumb is to make sure that whatever trait you're complimenting isn't usually seen as a sexual trait in any way. For example, telling someone that they have nice eyes is far more acceptable than telling a girl that they have a nice chest.
Shota grimaced, remembering some of the fools who tried to pursue Nomori when they were in school.
Even then, though, a good practice is make sure that someone doesn't feel threatened or uncomfortable when you're complimenting them, especially if you're not in a relationship, is to appear genuine. Try and have relaxed body language. Compliment them on something specific, usually that they have control over, and smile.
Todoroki frowned thoughtfully and Shota scrubbed at his face with a sigh, taking his swig of coffee before going on to clarify.
For example, let's say that you weren't dating Ida yet.
Shota continued wearily. Dear God, why was he doing this again?
Would you feel comfortable trying to compliment him right now so I could explain what I mean? It's fine if you don't.
Todoroki nodded resolutely. No, that's fine, he assured Shota before turning to Ida and saying, with the straightest expression ever,
Ida, I like your shoulders. They're very broad.
In a true testament to how seriously 1A was taking Shota's rules, no one laughed or made Todoroki feel uncomfortable following his incredibly awkward compliment, though Ida, predictably, blushed a bit in response, and a few of their classmates smiled good-naturedly. Shota, for his part, just blinked at Todoroki's disastrous attempt and prayed for patience.
All right, step by step. Try that again, but appear more genuine.
Todoroki frowned, looking from Ida back to Shota.
What do you mean? I was genuine. I genuinely like Ida's broad shoulders.
A few laughs escaped from some members of 1A this time, but Shota let it slide since it was all good-natured, and the only one who seemed at all uncomfortable was Ida, and that was just because his boyfriend was being so blunt. He could live.
Try putting more inflection in your voice, Todoroki,
Shota suggested before turning to Midoriya.
Would you mind saying exactly what Todoroki said, but with different inflection?
Not at all, Sensei, Midoriya chirped before turning to Ida with a determined stare, focused on excelling even at this. Shota fought back a snort. Predictable. Ida? Midoriya smiled, blushing a little bit. I like your shoulders. They're very broad. Ida's blush grew even fiercer, and Todoroki tilted his head minutely before nodding.
I think I understand.
He mused before looking at Ida once more and repeating, with slightly more inflection in his voice,
Ida, I like your shoulders. They're very broad.
Though still mostly monotone by anyone else's standards, the progress was leaps and bounds when it came to Todoroki, and Ida gave a startled grin at the progress.
Good,
Shota grunted.
Now try it again, but relax your shoulders and back. Don't seem so stiff.
Todoroki followed Shota's instructions, and Midoriya giggled a bit as he watched their boyfriend slowly get redder with each iteration of the compliment. Todoroki looked back at Shota for confirmation, and he nodded.
Butter, Shota acknowledged. Now try changing the subject of the compliment to something more specific.
Shota frowned. Why? He asked, genuinely curious, and not merely petulant.
I like Ida's broad shoulders.
Ashida's grin in particular was incredibly wide at this point, but she kept quiet with a warning look from Shota as he went on to explain.
Generally, when complimenting someone, it makes them more comfortable if you mention a specific trait and one that they can control. For example, complimenting someone on their shirt shows that not only do you pay attention to what they look like, which is a good indicator of attraction since it shows that you pay regular attention to them, but that you took the time to come up with a specific compliment. Additionally, it makes a compliment less uncomfortable if you mention a trait that can be changed, so that if someone isn't looking to receive attention in an area, they still feel as if they can control that. Let's say that Ida wasn't looking to be in a relationship, for example. Complimenting his shirt might make him feel confident about his fashion choices for the day, whereas complimenting him on his broad shoulders might make him feel as if that body part is inherently attractive to you in some way, which would be uncomfortable if he didn't want to appear attractive to me.
Todoroki murmured. He appeared to think for a second before turning to Ida and saying, with sufficient inflection and a relaxed posture,
Ida, I really like the way you styled your hair today.
Ida, despite having styled this in the exact same way since he was old enough to copy his older brother, was a brilliant red. A few of his classmates let out small whoops and cheers, which only served to place a little smirk on Todoroki's face, which in turn also turned Midoriya red at the sight. Teenagers. Shota nodded.
Good. And finally, smile.
Todoroki nodded once more. Looking at Ida one last time, he relaxed, tilted his head at the side, smiled, and said genuinely, "Ida, I really like the way you styled your hair today." In that moment, Shota was infinitely grateful that Ida wasn't the one with the quirk allowing spontaneous combustion, because if the beet red shade of his face had started to ring with anything to go by, the dorms would likely have been unliked by now if that were the case. Todoroki, for his part, seemed delighted. That is to say, he had a small smile turning up the corners of his lips, accompanied by the slightest smirk and a look of victory in his eyes. Ida eventually covered his face with his hands, apparently unable to take any more, and Midoriya laughed at them both with a blush of his own, probably happy to not be the source of good-natured teasing for once. Todoroki turned back to Shota after a moment, bowing a bit at the waist despite his sitting position. "Thank you for teaching me how to fluster my boyfriend, Aizawa-sensei." The rest of the class burst into laughter and smiles at that, while Ida a pitched noise that was barely audible to humans, and Shota just groaned, burying his head in his hands. "Don't say it like that," he demanded as the laughter died down, and he looked up, leveling a glare at his student. Todoroki simply shrugged with a smug look on his face. "Yes, sensei," he acquiesced easily, though the impish glint in his eyes suggested he wasn't really sorry at all. Shota groaned, wondering what his life had come to, that he would be teaching his students to flirt with each other. Throughout the room, different compliments began to filter through the air. "Yeah, Momo, your hair looks really lovely when you braid it." "Oh, you were slipping mainly today during rescue drills."
"Shoji, I sincerely appreciate your shirt today. I too listen to that band and enjoy their music."
"Danny Monkey Kid, your eyes are really pretty."
"All right."
Shota hissed over the crowd, reveling in the way that the kids immediately fell silent for once with absolutely no other threats necessary. Shota sighed, took the last sip of his coffee, and put the mug down on the table mournfully.
"2 more questions. Tokoyami, go." "Not to end the joyful aura surrounding us,"
Tokoyami murmured ruefully,
"but I must ask, how do you let someone down without hurting their feelings?"
Predictably, the mood in the room immediately fell, though everyone listened intently for Shota's answer, frowning sympathetically before responding.
"That's another situation where being genuine helps immensely. You'll probably be friends with the person already, and you'll ideally both want to continue being friends regardless of whether or not you decide to enter any sort of formal relationship beyond just being friends. But that might be hard for them at first if they're working to get over feelings for you. If they express interest in you that you don't return, say that you're sorry, but tell them that you don't feel the same way."
Shota frowned.
"Normally I don't advocate for apologizing for something that's not your fault, but I heard something once that made sense for this. It's not that you're apologizing for something you can't control so much as you're sorry that they're hurting for it. Not to be morbid, but in a way it's like telling someone that you're sorry for their loss. Not because you're the cause of it, but because you're sorry that they're hurting regardless."
Shota cocked his head, uncertain of that was clear.
"Does that make sense at all?"
Tokoyami nodded gratefully, though, and Shota felt himself relax a bit.
"Very much so, Aizawa-sensei. Thank you." "You're welcome."
Shota sighed, picking up his coffee mug, only to remember that it was empty. He put it back down on the table grumpily before looking back at his students.
"All right, 1 more question. Midoriya."
Midoriya's eyes glimmered with a curiosity that bordered on mischief, and Shota had just enough time to wonder if he'd picked poorly when the boy asked, "When did you and Mike Sensei start dating?" Virtually all of 1A leaned forward in eager anticipation as Shota frowned before answering,
"I'll roll to treat that."
"Aww!" chorused the kids, only to be interrupted by Shinsu.
"I can tell you about that."
He grinned wickedly, and Shota waved his hand more dismissively than he truly felt.
"Whatever."
Shota grunted as he picked up his coffee mug and went back into the kitchen for a refill.
"That's it for tonight, and forever. So, let's set the stage,"
Shinso narrated smugly, smirking at the attention of the entire class on him, whether they admit it or not.
"It's Dad and Pop's final year at UA. They've been pining since they met when Dad transferred in from Gen Ed after the sports festival his first year. Auntie Nev's been trying to set them up the entire time."
The brief, stunned silence that had enveloped 1A is abruptly broken. Questions shouted from every angle as they all absorbed this new information. "The fuck? This is Sensei and Present Mike? Wait, which one is Dad and which one is Pops? Aizawa Sensei started in Gen F? I didn't know. They buying for how long? Man, I never thought we were homeless. Hold on, is Auntie Nem Midnight Sensei? Shota felt a sharp throb in his temple that heralded an oncoming migraine, and yes, right. This was the regret he knew he felt at the beginning of the song. Slamming down the rest of the coffee in the pot, Shota turned back around, ready to grab the papers that still needed grading off the dining table, face war, and then flee. Hitoshi! But maybe not before giving his son detention. No one ever said he wasn't petty.